Daughter of my people sing. African orature and human rights. Writing and speaking from the heart of my mind. Selected essays and speeches. Muthoni wa Kirima, Mau Mau Woman Field Marshal. Mzalendo Kimathi. Talking about Micere's imaginative and even non-fiction publications is an exciting enterprise anyway I see it for me. The only thing is that because we've been so close, there is also always a sense of a conflict of interest a bit in the way I can talk about her work. I suspect she feels the same about mine. So frankly, for the more expanded appreciation of Micere Mugo's works, we leave it to the experts, because many scholars and teachers and of course students have had to deal with it and have commented on it, including, I'm sure, some very exciting and astute pieces for this project. There are only a few individuals of whom we can say that meeting them changed our lives for the better. For me, Micere Mugo is one such rare individual. Over 40 years later, I can still remember the place, time of day, and the year I met Micere for the first time. It was in Nairobi. It was an afternoon at the home of friends who had at the time opened their home to me during one of the more stable pockets of my many wanderings. Among the other friends there was one whom I've since only referred to as my brother Jonathan, as in Carriera. I always suspected that the idea that Micere Githae and I should meet must have been hatched between Carriera, Charles Lewis, the then managing director of Oxford University Press, Kenya, and most especially his wife, Premila. And I've always felt enormously grateful to them for that. There she was, strikingly beautiful, amazingly articulate, and infinitely wise. Micere is one of the most socially and politically sensitive beings I would be privileged to meet ever. She is a brilliant teacher, a thinker, writer, and dramatic artist, a progressive activist, and an extremely high achiever in a few other areas. She has always moved seamlessly from one high level of doing to another and another, on and on. Micere Githae was introduced to me as the former headmistress of a girls' school, and it immediately struck me that those young people were very lucky. I don't know why I instinctively thought that, but it turned out to be very right. I was to feel that way about all her students, wherever she taught. I think of how wonderfully enriched her students at the African American Studies Department at Syracuse University were at the time of her retirement, which is as recent as 2015. She is a consummate teacher. Thinking of how Micere works as a teacher, as a professor, as a Mwalimu, you wouldn't think that you would have anything else in her to give to to keep for herself and to give to the world. And yet the power and clarity of Micere's thought processes and her analytical abilities, as well as her physical and other energies, are extraordinary. Her commitment to a leftist radical perception of society in general, and which embraces her clear standing and relentless activism as a socialist, a Pan-Africanist, and a feminist, is peerless, both within the academy and without. Recognition of Mugo's determined combativeness against the viciousness of the patriarchal order that controls the destiny of all humanity is universal, all of which certainly add up to a personality that is nothing less than dazzling. As a Pan-Africanist, Micere's sense and understanding of Africa and Africans and our historical and other realities is unsentimental and dynamic. Her faith in our capacity to attain our best potential is rock solid. The same applies to her belief in women. Women as women and young girls, wherever we are, not only in Kenya, not only in Africa, but globally. In retrospect, one fact I've had to admit is that after our initial introduction in Nairobi, Micere and I didn't meet for quite some time. Yet, remarkably, I associate her with all that was inspiring and joyous from my Kenyan years, and no wonder. In the end, I realized that the circles I moved in and almost all those I came to consider as friends, colleagues, or comrades were the same for Micere. Apart from Carriera and the Lewises, I speak of the great Ngugi wa Thiong'o, Pasali Likimani, his friend and the father of my daughter, Kina, their mutual friend and the journalist Philip Ocheng. The air in Nairobi in those days was filled with intellectual fervor and artistic exuberance, so much so that we thought we were living in an era and in a place that was very, very, very special. And all of that emanated, or at least some of it, from Payapa Arts and Culture Center and its founders, the then power couple of Mwalimu Aidoo, the renowned artist, and his wife, the equally renowned writer Rebecca Aidoo. I got to know that this treasure trove of brain power and artistic energy was made up of individuals among whom Micere had grown and many of whom she'd gone to school with. I later learned with great surprise that some of the individuals in those circles were not Kenyan. So welcoming had the Kenya of those days been for those of us who were exiles, self-exiles, or like me at the time, just optimistic wanderers. Nairobi especially was stimulating and full of fun in the way so many African capital cities had been in those heady, immediate post-independence years. Those other African writers and intellectuals included the South Sudanese Taban Lolion, Okot Pibitek of Uganda, and David Rubadiri of Malawi. The latter's sojourn in Kenya at the time was one of the earliest evidence of the coming chaos and various violences that would plague the neo-colonial African political space. Years after I returned to Ghana from Kenya, Micere and I seemed rather unsurprised by the strange turn our lives had taken when we became political refugees in Harare, Zimbabwe. My child Kina and I in 1983, Micere and her two children, Mumbi and Jerry, a year later. I was trying to survive rather precariously as a self-employed writer and consultant on literature and allied spaces, while Micere taught steadily at the University of Zimbabwe. Those were years of sisterly bonding for us as progressive activists and writers. We were virtually living in one another's home, giving support to each other as parents in the ways that are necessary for single women with daughters, while sharing the support of friends, comrades, and fellow writers. I would want here to pay homage to the late Dr. Nathan Chamuyarira, who had been a great mutual friend and pillar of support for both of us in the greatly challenging space of political exile. He was a protector with the intellectual stature and personal integrity that was absolutely remarkable. Nathan, comrade, Mazwita. After around a decade in Zimbabwe, Micere and I found ourselves once again in the same country, the USA this time, though not the same city. However, again, these were more years for more collaborations in both old and new areas. As colleagues, we seem to have had enormous confidence in one another's artistic and intellectual gifts, because every now and then one of us would invite the other to her university as a reader, lecturer, or member of a discussion panel. I must confess, at least on my part, that I had an impish expectation that my sister would come and blow away my departmental colleagues, which she invariably did. A most beautiful example and culmination of this was when Micere came to be part of the event organized by the Department of Africana Studies to mark my retirement from Brown. We also met at conferences organized by other colleagues for organs like the ALA, ASA, or the latter's Women's Caucus. Another very special piece of collaboration was Micere's traveling to come and interview me as her contribution to the first script edited for me by Anne V. Adams. In 1997-98, I was pleasantly surprised by Micere coming to Ghana, because she thereby gave me the opportunity of showing her a bit of my country, Ghana. After all, I had met her in hers. She was in Ghana for about 10 days to participate in a seminar at the University of Ghana. For a long time after she'd been here and gone, especially for my two brothers who had helped me to look after her, time was reckoned as before Sister Micere came and after Sister Micere left. Apart from the wonder of our own relationship as friends, family, and colleagues, I've also had the benefit of Micere's support in very many areas of my life, as including one as being part of a group of artistic, intellectual, and politically minded sisters and brothers. The problem with acknowledging people publicly is that inevitably one, two, or more get overlooked. The temptation to sound overblown and exaggerated can be a challenge when talking about Professor Micere Githae Mugo and her work. A vigorous thinker and a progressive activist, She is tenacious, uncompromising, and utterly indefatigable. Micere confirms for me the belief, certainly among Africans and possibly around the world, that it's not only your parents' child who can be your sister or your brother. I think we are family in the truest sense of the word, and in spite of being fiercely political, on the personal level, Micere is loyal, caring, and affectionate. Another of my warmest memories is when one cold and drizzly English morning, Micere sent her sister Judy to where I was staying briefly in London with other family friends. Judy was to check on me and make sure that I was all right. Anytime I met other members of her close family, I always came away with a nice, comforting familiarity and a great warmth. If ever there was any person of whom it could be said that she has the ability to mobilize people around a cause or any activity, including sometimes the most ridiculously banal one, then Micere is that individual. She is definitely more than adequately endowed to do that. It is one thing believing that part of Africa's problem is how to merge the excellent legacy that we had inherited from our own people with whatever can be described as positive, if that were possible, from the colonials, and then to produce a third thing that dazzled. Micere, on her stand and activities on the issue of African orature, she has done this and more. Nobody, no scholar, researcher on the continent has been able to focus her own attention and manage to draw ours to this question of orature, and the fact that as a solid cultural practice from Africa, it deserves serious academic attention. And if for nothing at all, we hail my sister for this incredible achievement. Now, talking about Micere's work really gives me a sense of a conflict of interest, because really it's like evaluating myself publicly, and frankly that's not possible. But I would like to draw attention to the fact that in spite of her keen political feel for literally every aspect of human existence, it's amazing how absolutely lyrical, sensitive, and just plain accomplished Micere's imaginative works, and even also her non-fiction publications are. But I know that other people, professors, researchers, students, have worked on all these areas, and they can talk about them, and indeed they have on various platforms, hopefully including for this documentary, what they think, and brought out the sheer greatness of her work. However, I would like to isolate one and say that, like giving herself to the world, we are also grateful for her doing the work on Mutoni wa Kirima, Mama Woman Field Marshal, because as we all know, and I'm not going to whine too much here, being a woman, people, I mean, no commentators, whether the British or our own fighters and researchers, you know, they may remember Krima uh, and mention her in person, but it was always in person. So we are enormously grateful to you, my sister, for doing this work on Kirima, making her real for us. And then one thing that I would also like to remind us on is that in terms of the global space, or what we used to call international arena, if you are looking for the one African woman, or even one of the women who has literally over the years helped, acted, worked in areas to bring together cultural workers, social activists on issues like human rights, the rights of the woman, and of course, African liberation itself. For the last 50 years, since I am her colleague, and since I'm not only her colleague, but also her age mate of sort, and age doesn't really matter in so many of these things, I would say that Micere has been the one person